Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on where you are on this fast forward planet, which is wrapped in layers of turbulence like never before. Well, I wouldn't say never before, just as interesting as ever. And that includes some pretty tumultuous times in human history. And the complexity and uncertainty can be paralytic, or they can lead to activation and solutions if you have a certain way of looking at problems. And I've been deeply interested in the model of the Institute for Humane Education since I stumbled on it after we moved to Maine 4 years ago, not too far from where it exists as an entity on the ground. Um, with my blogging at the New York Times and with Sustain What, I've pursued a practice that's kind of related to how this team works with teachers and students to foster the capacity to examine a complex and consequential system and identify the problem, actual problems within it, and then innovate around solutions and then practice, carry that forward. So I'm really thrilled today to have on Sustain What a teacher, a student, and a practitioner, one of the professionals at the Institute, to walk us through a little bit of how this works, how it can spread. This is the Institute mainly works in the education arena, but I see this model of this framework for solutionary efforts around tough problems as applying it as well at the community scale. If you have fights over your zoning or your planning or disaster risk or the issues we're all dealing with right now and the politics, the same kind of capacities that are being promulgated through schools can be of great use to anybody. So it's just great to have here today Katie Coppins, who's a middle school science teacher at Falmouth Middle School. She's the author of more than a half dozen STEM-themed books, children's books. I'm going to ask you how you possibly fit that into one life with 24-hour days and seven-day weeks. She was in the sort of inaugural pilot project for a solutionary framework for K-12 schools in Maine here, and you're going to meet one of our students today as well, who came through that process. One thing I love to do is look at something over time to see what's actually happening, as opposed to just snapshots of an idea, and we're going to do that today. The student is Kate Holdridge, who was in that original Maine pilot program for solutions-based learning through the Institute. You're now an honors student, finishing up your freshman year at the George Washington University in DC area. You're very focused on political science, public policy, and you're very focused on civic engagement, civil rights, and gender equality. And so if you go to the post that I've written about this, you can have links to Katie and Kate's background and activities. And finally, Julie Meltzer is the director of K-12 and teacher education at the Institute for Humane Education. She's now currently in Virginia, but again, located not far from me here in down East Maine. Your books include, as a co-author, Taking the Lead on Adolescent Literacy, Action Steps for School-Wide Success. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy days. If anyone ever doubts that teachers are busy and educators, just talk to one for a few hours and you understand how tough it is to fit all the work into the days. And we're going to learn about this going forward. So we're going to focus on Maine just as a case study and for the direct experience of Katie and Kate. But we're going to go wider than that because the Institute has gone wider with this work. Maybe, Julie, can you start just briefly talking about this, the Maine Solutionaries Project, and then we'll expand outward and we'll also talk about the actual framework. But just give a snapshot of what's going on in Maine that's of interest should be of interest to anyone who's thinking about complex challenges and education.
Thanks, Andy, and thanks for having us. The Maine Solutionaries Project wasn't called that back when Katie was part of the pilot project back in 2017, 2018. And there was a really great pilot project. And then you may have heard about this, there was a pandemic that kind of shut everything down. And then I was fortunate enough to join the Institute staff to help carry out their mission of educating a generation of solutionaries. It's a big mission for a small organization. And so we did another pilot project that in collaboration with the Maine Curriculum Leaders Association, and that was funded by UNUM. And we had, I think, 23 people, 23 teachers from throughout Maine who did the Solutionary Micro-Credential course, which is how we're now doing professional learning around this and teaching people how to take the solutionary framework, bring it to their students. And those folks were just starting to implement a year ago when we were also in conversation with the Maine Department of Education's interdisciplinary instruction team. And they were very excited because they saw the solutionary framework as being a really practical roadmap and a really great approach that could be adapted in lots of ways. The framework itself is, as you can see on the screen, it's a 4-part framework that asks students to identify a problem that's local to their community, but connected to the rest of the planet, like most complex problems are, or a local manifestation of what's happening in many, many different areas. And we ask students to get to a local manifestation because then they can work on it. And it's really sort of a problem-based, place-based approach. So students identify a problem they care about in their school or community. They investigate that deeply through talking to people, getting different perspectives, analyzing root causes, researching what other people are doing about that problem, then innovating a solution and trying to think about heading off negative consequences by thinking about solutions that will do the most good and least harm to people, animals, and the planet, and then to go do something. And that's where the roadmap really is helpful because it helps people not get stuck just in inquiry, but also not jump to what we call shallow action. And this process is what we designed a whole project with the state of Maine around. Katie came on as one of the location-based coaches in Maine. We have a whole set of coaches of teachers who have used this approach successfully with their students and who are now helping other teachers to do so. And we have had about a little over 300 teachers complete the program in the last year. And so they're in all 16 counties of Maine. And right now we're in the process of collecting stories from all over Maine about what students are thinking about and what they're working on.
Right. It's just great. And we'll show a video in a couple of minutes that has a bit of a timeline for Kate and some other students who've gone through this process. And now Katie, you were a middle school teacher already. And how did this come to be in your radar? How did you even learn about it? And then maybe talk a little bit about the experience of trying to adopt it and still do the other things teachers have to do.
Yeah. So originally the service learning coordinator in our district, Holly McEwen, heard about the pilot program opportunity and she reached out to me. She thought it'd be a good fit for me, either for the classroom or I'm an advisor for the middle school's community service club. So just thought it would be something that I'd be excited about. And so as soon as I started to read this idea of inquiry to action, it kind of had me hooked at that. And so it was a different experience at the beginning, as Julie mentioned, when I started in the 2017 to 2018 school year, where teachers came together from all over the state and we got trained in this process. And at that time, they were still working together with educators to create this guidebook that you see in front of you. And so we were really learning together as a group. And it's evolved for me over the years. The first 2 years, it was co-taught with a social studies teacher. When I had Kate, I taught 2 subjects. I taught science and ELA. And we had students come together and learn about systems thinking, root cause, leverage points, all of those key pieces. And then we broke up into environmental issues and social issues. And then we went through that whole process that Julie described together. When COVID happened, we switched to one subject. So at that point, I now just teach 6th grade science. So I do it as environmental action projects with my students, but I've continued to do it all the way through, even when we were doing hybrid learning. It actually was something that students were working on at home. In March of 2020, I had to make a choice if I was going to continue with it, and I did. So in May, I had students do environmental action projects. I had to figure out ways from them being at home at that time of what it would look like. But I haven't stopped. I just really believe in this vision, and it's been transformative for me in my teaching, in that when I start a unit, I don't know what projects students will end up choosing. I don't even know what topics, because mine is quite broad, anything within environmental issues. So I don't know if they'll choose anything from microplastics to pollinators, to food waste. And so from that, I just need to be flexible, and I've learned to really embrace that. I do it at the end of the year, and I've done this every single year because at that point I know my students really well. And it almost becomes this capstone project at the end for us of 6th grade, where they get to pull in all the things that they've learned about communication, collaboration, and then enhance them even farther. So, yeah.
That's fascinating. When you say the end of the year, like how short is the unit? How long is the unit?
Yeah, so it's typically a month for me. So I'll start it in about 2 weeks, and it would go right until the last week of school for us in June. Yeah, and
So
it's great.
you-
You're outside. Yep.
By the way, how many students typically in a class?
Typically, I have a little over 20 in a typical class.
Wow. It's incredible. Well, let's meet one of those students, at least from way back when. Hold on a second. Kate, at George Washington University, there was a time just a few years ago when you were in middle school. How did this come into your radar? What did you just sort of hear? You were hearing from your teacher, we're going to do a new thing this spring, kind of thing?
Yes. If I remember correctly, like we talked about, I was in the pilot program, I think it was 2017, 2018. And I remember it was kind of just presented as this new kind of like tester project we were doing in class, which was like kind of just combining like a bunch of different like subjects. It was very interdisciplinary, which I think also at the time was like something that stood out to me, even now, just looking back at the fact that it really incorporated many different things that we had been learning throughout the year. And so kind of like what Ms. Copens had said, just about it being a capstone project, like it really tied together a lot of things. And so I just remember it being a very like cool, like exciting project because it was learning, but it was also very hands-on learning. Like it was giving you like tools to become empowered and make like a change. And I think even back then, that was just a very like unique and different thing than I had done previously.
And what your project was on animal testing, or?
Yes, if I remember correctly, it was on animal testing, specifically in the cosmetic industry. I think my group had ended up, I can't remember the exact details because it was so long ago, but I believe that it somehow had transformed into, we had gone and contacted a couple of local shops or like grocery stores, just asking if there's going to be a way that they could like more prominently display different brands and promote brands that were cruelty free.
That's great. And what was happening here? This was a summit of some kind of different schools?
Yes. I believe this was at USM in Portland, where there was a bunch of the other like groups that were a part of the pilot program. They came and they presented. So I think I was on the younger end of it. So there was a bunch of kids. So like there was me and being 6th grade, and then all the way up through high school, I believe. Could be wrong. Someone can correct me on that. And it basically was just a summit of everyone presenting their different topics. And it was also just really interesting seeing like the wide array of people and ages that were able to interact with this. So there was my group, which was of course on the younger end, and then high schoolers, which had, I would say, like more complex things because they were older at the time. And so it was just a very interesting way to bring together everything we'd learned.
It's fantastic. So let's hold on a second. I'm just going to shift the slide so we can watch. There's a video that the Institute put together that kind of goes through a bit of this process and your journey with some other students. Hold on one second while I pull this up. And if anyone has a quick comment to throw in about those early days while I'm getting this ready, that'd be great.
I can give context of the video if you want, Julie, or you can of what this
Sure,
would be.
go ahead. Go right ahead.
So there was footage taken when these students were in 6th grade. You get a sense of it right here. The student, this is Hannah, on the right, she was in 6th grade. On the left, this is when they were seniors. So they came back May last year, so a year ago, and just reflected on the process of the unit. So you'll see interviews from them at that time of what stayed with them, what really resonated. Then you'll see clips going back and forth of when they were in 6th grade that pilot year.
Okay, well let's hear it. And if you could just mute your microphones for a second, it'll be easy for this now.
As a teacher, you never know what's going to resonate with your students. So when my former 6th graders came back as seniors, it was amazing to hear the information that they remembered, but also the moments that they remembered, and just how much it, in very small and big ways, shifted their way of looking at problems, looking at the world, and looking at the actions they can take.
It was such a big moment for me in 6th grade to go from sitting at a desk and writing things out that the teacher was telling me to hands-on, I'm learning this and I'm choosing my way to go about this.
It helps open and broaden your horizon on global issues, which I think is very important because at such a young age, you don't quite realize the impact that you can have. You think, oh, I'm too young and I don't have that much of a voice, but I think it really helps you realize that you do have the ability to help and make a change.
I want to do something now that I want to help people, so maybe something in like the medical field, and that was definitely stemmed from my service that I did in middle school and specifically the Solutionary Project.
It's really important for kids to think critically about the things they see in the world and how they can make a difference, and when they look to the future to think about what difference they want to make rather than what they want to be.
I would say that this program has informed me as someone who's interested in creating a more fair and equitable society, and one that really embraces people from all different backgrounds and all different perspectives. And so being able to look at a problem from multiple lenses, I think will be very beneficial.
We were looking up places that do fast fashion and use that, and I remember sitting there being like, oh my gosh, like I'm part of the problem and I want to be part of the solution, not the problem.
Those skills of not seeing a problem as just surface level, like really going down into the weeds of why is this happening, what can be done. Those are really good skills just to have to analyze any problems in the future.
I definitely think it influenced what I want to do in the future. I'm really interested in political science and different issues like healthcare and women and gender issues.
Your effort that you put in will eventually lead to some form of success, whether it be through learning what does and doesn't work, or to give students, the idea that they can achieve what matters to them. They can make a change in the issues that are important in their lives.
At the end of the project, we got to watch different schools and different high schoolers and middle schoolers, and there were kids from all age present their different topics, and there was every topic you can kind of imagine, and that was just really impactful because I hadn't really learned about a lot of those topics yet.
Now I'm more aware of different issues than I would have been if I hadn't have done this project, and when there's one that I'm maybe passionate about or that I care about deeply, I try to take my own action as well as talk to other people and let them know about it and see if they want to take action with me.
In addition to giving problem-solving skills and looking at things critically, it's had a large impact on what I want to be and what I see myself doing in the future.
I'm going to keep doing this type of work because the world is going to continue to have local and global problems, and it's essential that we help students know that there's something they can do about them, that their voice and their actions matter.
Well, that, again, very inspiring stuff here, and I thought it would be great to dig in a little bit more on sort of some of the examples. Katie and Kate, what are some of the problems that have been identified? What's on students' minds when when they're given the homework of saying find a problem? Maybe start with Katie, and then a little more from Kate on how you chose your path on this.
Yeah, so there are lots of ways an educator could approach this, and I've learned that also through coaching with the solutionary unit. So one example is I worked with fourth grade teachers in Brunswick who wanted to do a unit around pollinators. So all of the action projects fell under that big umbrella, and students had lots of choice of how they could approach this. I think mine is a little bit unique in how broad it is. They're just any environmental topics because it falls within our ecology unit. And so it really lends well to after they've done the background knowledge within that unit, this is that final piece. So, I mean, I try to give as much voices and choice as I can to students about the topic, about really whatever their interests are. So like I mentioned before, everything from plastics to fossil fuels to food waste, to students trying to use the school bus, right? Transportation that's available rather than getting dropped off. We've had erosion was something that students took on last year. We now do a water unit. It's called the People and Places, the Presumpscot. So I've had a lot of students do things that advocate for our local watershed since doing that unit within our ecology unit. And then once they have their topic, the other big piece is their action project. So I try to help students also own this of what their vision is. So it can be anything from an art project to a writing piece. So we had a student have an op-ed published 2 years ago about the importance of fish ladders. And that was something she learned in our unit on the river about fish ladders. And so she chose to write, and that was really exciting. That got in the Portland Press Herald, which was huge for a sixth grader to have that be published. Yeah. I mean, there's just been so many where sometimes students' ideas, I see them not doing most good and least harm. I try to have them figure that out rather than me tell them. An example was a couple of years ago, I had students who wanted to do something about having more reusable water bottles being used in school. And so their original idea was to buy everyone in our school a reusable water bottle. So we as adults can think about the possible potential of issues with that problem, but I wanted to help them figure that out on their own. So I recommended they get some data, survey students, see, do students have reusable water bottles? And they quickly realized they did. It was just that they weren't using them. So they shifted on their own, realizing it wasn't about buying them, it was about encouraging them to use them. So they decided to have something called Water Bottle Wednesdays. So every Wednesday, they first met with the principal to get support. So that's a big part also, talking to people who are stakeholders in these problems, who are invested in them. And they wanted to do every Wednesday on the intercom a fact about plastic use. And then they designed reusable water bottle stickers. And students who came into school and showed their reusable water bottle were given one of the stickers that they designed. And so their goal was to have reusable water bottles, and they just shifted to instead have it being students using the ones they already owned and promoting a culture around them. So it was, for me, an example of not just telling them, oh, that idea isn't going to really work for this, because that's not what this is about. It's having them go through the journey of thinking deeply about root cause and what problems they're really trying to solve. And just helping steer them toward that. And it really meant a lot more that they, through that data, through their own survey, came to that conclusion on their own.
So that gets back to the framework. It is a mental model. I think, a lot of us are stuck or spend parts of our lives stuck on the idea problem, solution. And it's very linear. And sometimes you have a preconceived idea. The solution must be X. Mm-hmm. But a lot of what you're describing here is you're investigating your own presumptions as much as anything else. Does that feel right? And Kate,
absolutely.
There's a couple of really good questions have come in, but I'll get to them in a minute. So Kate, back to you. You're at George Washington University. You're focused on women and other issues. I think you were working at some campus entity. When you think about how you think, how much of it seems to resonate from this experience? Oh, you're muted. Sorry, I had you all muted before.
I honestly think that this like completely, honestly, really shifted how I think about, honestly, like what we talked about in the videos, just like my entire life path going forward. I honestly was thinking about this the other day, and like as a political science and public policy major, one of the reasons that I chose to focus on this field is just because of, I realized that it was going to be the path that I could go and take to go and create the change that I want to go see in the world. I remember I was sitting in my 10th grade AP government class, and we were learning about the legal system and a lot of like the landmark Supreme Court cases. And I remember thinking to myself, wow, like you can create a lot of change while working within the system. And this is something that I want to do because there are a lot of problems in the world that I've identified. And I think that this path is the best way that I know that I can go make a change, while also thinking about what I learned many years ago, which was creating the change that does the most good with also the least amount of harm at the same time. And so just regardless of whatever problem I'm tackling, whatever assignment I'm tackling, just the idea of thinking about the different stakeholders and the root causes and the tangible solutions that I can present, it's very applicable to things beyond just this project.
Yeah, that most good, least harm-ish thing, reality, which I explored here with Zoe, who co-founded the Institute, is something that's very hard for a lot of people to get their minds around as well. You end up in a channel or a track. You're either all renewable energy or we tend to get sort of into a track, and it becomes hard to think about compromise and about trade-offs. Like with animal testing, were there any particular things that came up where you realized, oh, we can't have a world with no animal testing or something like that? How did that work?
If I remember correctly, I mean, it's a very big issue to talk about in the first place. Like there's a lot of different components. And so I think that originally this project was just me and my group mates. We were just very anti-animal testing in general, but it's a very nuanced thing. Like animal testing is used in a variety of different industries beyond medication, vaccines, all the way up to cosmetics. And so what we did was we did a little bit of background research and realized that what we could do and make the most change in would have been the cosmetic industry, because the testing that is done there is, if I remember correctly, not always very necessary, or it could be done in a more ethical way. And also just as sixth graders, like that was a much more like easier and more empowering thing that we could take on versus necessarily going and challenging like the way that medical testing works. And so I think that it was really emphasized to us figuring out the pathway that we could choose and take that would make us be able to create some sort of change. And so looking at bigger problems and kind of just breaking that down.
Yeah, and here you are now in heading into an arena where trade-offs are just fundamental.
Yes, exactly.
It's fantastic. Hold on, I'm going to actually put up a question or two here because they're really good. First of all, Radhika Iyengar, who I used to work with at Columbia University and is in the education arena there, says, so lovely to see education delving into real life issues concerning the students. And I think that's a key part of this. If it's not something you care about and experience directly, it's harder to get deeply engaged, especially in just a few weeks. So that's true. Now, Florida Climate Educators Network says, so because students pick an area as a class. Oh, you pick an area as a class, right? You mean a general theme? Like
for mine, I don't. It's by students' interest. So across my 4 science classes, there might be 20 different topics happening. So, but you can do it by an area, like the teachers I supported in Brunswick who chose to do their projects around pollinators. My husband is a science teacher in high school, and he does scientific misinformation. That is his topic. So there are lots of approaches for this.
And so because of that, do you worry about meeting some Maine standards, or is it because of the short time at the end of the year, not so much an issue?
I mean, I think this is very...
This question, how do you fit this into the standards?
Yeah.
With all the other obligations teachers have.
So for me, we follow next generation science standards in Maine. And so this connects into our life science standards. But then there's also the other pieces that are so important about research, critical thinking, what students are learning about systems thinking is so important within this. Then you add collaboration, communication. I mean, there are skills that transcend far beyond the content of the unit. And yeah, it really, like I mentioned before, is a great capstone project where it brings together the learning we've done throughout the year, but I also get to see students' passions of what are the topics they really care about. And the part that's been exciting is seeing it extend beyond. I mean, many students have kept going with these beyond our unit when the school year ends. I had a group who made a free little library. So they were focusing on overconsumption and giving access to people of materials. And they put that free little library up in Falmouth, right by the Parks and Rec department, and continue to do book drives to feed, add to that free little library. And I mean, there's just been so many projects over these years. But I think the choice for me has been a really exciting way to end the year and let students really own their own path.
That's just great.
I could speak to that too, Andy, though. As Katie mentioned, there are lots of jumping off points, and before you get to the investigate phase of a particular problem, you've got the identify phase. And that can be, as Katie was talking about, students are going back to and reusing and using again and building on knowledge that they already learned. So there's lots of standards piece. Instead of just hitting the standards, they're actually using that information and applying it and retaining it because of that. Also, we're finding over and over again that when students are doing something that they're interested in, that they're really motivated to take action on, they're really coachable. You can really ask them to redo that email, to practice that presentation, to really work hard on collaboration. And they'll do it. They'll just keep working at it because they want it to look good. They want it to be professional. They want it to accomplish the goals that they have. So in some ways, if you have some standards where there's some students who need some skill standards further worked on, this is a great way to do it because it gives you a lot of opportunity to coach.
There are more questions, and I have one that I want to slip into. Are the students ever working as teams on a specific project? So that it's not just in every individual.
It can be, but most of the time they're in teams.
Oh, they are so that's the majority. That's good.
Yep, most of them.
Yeah, and it's kind of important that a lot of the work takes place in teams because, like, no one person ever changed the world on their own. They really need to learn how to work with others and how to collaborate and coordinate and communicate. So the team piece is actually a part of the whole project.
Yeah. Now, it's kind of exciting for me that Radhika Iyengar, who posted a comment a few minutes ago, I sent her the link to see if she might join us. She's at Teachers College. I think you're still at Teachers College at Columbia. We'll find out in a second. So she wanted to come on. I invited her to come on to see if she had some questions or you have questions for her. So hold on a second. Where are you? Radhika, hi.
I have been following this conversation and it's so fascinating and just gives me so much energy to hear all the amazing work that you all are doing and to have a teacher and student reflection. I think it's just super fascinating. So congratulations to you all for such a cutting edge education tool that you guys have developed.
Now, Radhika, you've participated in and looked at a lot of different education models, including communities with water pollution in South Asia. And so just maybe a quick catch up on what you're working on that's relevant. And if you had a question, that would be cool too.
Sure. So I am currently working on a course that is on that's called Ages of Globalization with Professor Sachs, and it's like a global course which students could take online. The website is agesofglobalization.com, and it's to basically give insight on sustainability issues, current sustainability issues wherever the student is based, but with a historical, political, religious, philosophies that are around there, and how have civilizations come to be, and how have they shaped us to give us an understanding of why are these problems there and how can we get to solve them. So when I hear capstone project, I think that's just so wonderful to hear, because it's all, the work that you are doing, I think it's student led. And just wanted to highlight that with Ages of Globalization, it is very much student led. After you come to a place where you've learned global history, you've learned how civilizations have formed, and how people came to be with countries and political drawings, and we are using GIS to map all the things and have a lot of other technical things that I'm not going to go into. But the idea of doing this capstone to give the students the leadership to go ahead and start investigating, the questions that they have are amazing. And it's also just wanted to see how you were able to craft this scope, because the scope can go anywhere. It's student led. So one thing that is also fearsome is, it can go in so many different directions. And so how can you bring things together, and how can you actually take a path forward, and how do you design such a learning process? I think it would be fascinating to hear
Yeah,
from.
we'll hear more. Maybe Julie, you could weigh in a little bit more on how this has been designed. And Julie, could you just weigh in a little bit on the map I'm showing, which is the Institute for Humane Education is based in Maine. This project is in Maine, but there's a lot going on.
Yeah, we're really excited because this work is striking a chord similar to the work that you're talking about, Radhika. The work is sort of at the right time. Students are really upset or depressed or anxious about all of the challenges that are facing the world, and they need to gain some agency and some optimism and some skills by doing something. And so we've been able to work with teachers and schools across the US and around the world. The Solutionary Micro-Credential course can be provided in a hybrid model like we do here in Maine, or it can be completely online, with always the idea that we're building community and we're building a support system for educators who are doing this work and who are really wanting to prepare their students to become change makers. To your point, though, one thing about the framework that I found to be so amazing is how flexible it is to all these different contexts, from elite private schools to government schools in Kenya, from schools here in the US to schools in Europe, wherever people want to use it. But the other piece that we do during the course is really to coach the teachers to put those guardrails up. Teachers are at different places when they enter the course as to how much they have experience with project-based learning, with supporting student-led inquiry. And so we help them to figure out, okay, if this is the first time you're doing this, here's some ways that you might want to make it so that you don't feel out of control, and you can really give some of that student voice and choice, but maybe not wide open. And then as you get more experienced and you've done this more times, then you might decide that you want to offer even more voice and choice, or more topics to explore, or longer periods of time over which the projects can take place. So it's sort of like an accordion, it can be brought very small, and students still have real power because they're invested and they take action and they become very knowledgeable about the thing that they care about, the problem they want to solve. Or it could be really wide. And we often think, what would it be like if students could go through a school district? For example, I'll take Katie's school district, and in fourth grade, they all did a project related to pollinators, different projects related to pollinators. And then they came and they worked with Katie, and they really took a much more open approach in small groups around environmental issues. And then what if they did a capstone project in high school where they took an issue that they have been learning about and wanted to do a much deeper dive into, and in pairs or small groups or individually carried out yet another working through of the framework to take action on something that they're passionate about.
That's great. This notion that the model works at every scale. Kate, I want to take this back to you at George Washington University. Are, are you taking any classes there that you feel have this action-oriented approach, breaking down problems, not just sort of learning about Middle East history or the like?
Yeah, for sure. I am actually a member of the Honors College here. And one of the things that really drew me to actually just coming to this program in the first place is the emphasis on solution-based learning that it does, as well as just the interdisciplinary approach that it does. So for instance, last semester, I essentially took my science credit that I needed as a gen ed requirement under the concept of under a class that was titled energy. And so what I did for that class was I explored the physics behind different types of energy systems, but then also looked into this different like socioeconomic and cultural implications that different energy systems have. So I have a better understanding of how like the actual energy grid in the US works. And at the same time, we also did a lot of projects looking at different types of renewable sources of energy and how that may benefit the climate crisis, and also the different like implications that it have that these like solar energy has or hydropower has, because while on the surface, like a lot of them seem really good, there is a lot of other socioeconomic implications that they also have too. And so that class in general just really emphasized the complexity that the climate crisis has. And my other political science classes too, I've taken a lot of more of my intro classes, so I haven't been able to dive deep into some more like of the more nuanced topics within the field. But I've noticed that a lot of the emphasis within my classes has just been embracing the complexity and looking at the complexity of all these issues and just understanding that there is critical analysis that really has to go on to truly understand the world around you.
By the way, if anyone watching wants to come into the studio briefly to ask a question, take a picture of your screen right now. I created a QR code. I'm going to leave that up for just a second. The Florida Climate Educators Network had another question. It's kind of a particular one about the summits, and she said they say talk a bit about the conference with the presentations from students from different, well, presumably from different schools too. How does that work? How many students and schools are involved, and how long is it? And does everyone present? Again, thinking about this as a model for someone in Florida or elsewhere. Maybe Julie. Yeah.
So we have shifted the model from that original pilot program because it was clear that while it was really rich and really wonderful, it was going to limit the amount of expansion that we could do to bring the model to enough different contexts and enough different places. And there isn't always a third party who can convene students from all different schools, and there isn't always the possibility to do that. So while we still think that a student summit, it can be extremely powerful, and while we were hoping to do one which would have allowed students from many parts of Maine to come together, unfortunately the funding is not available for us to follow through with that as we had intended in June. But then the other piece to this is we have a lot of schools that do their sharing as a solutionary fair, where students share what actions they took and what call to action they have for the people in their community. And the community comes in, and it's not just parents coming in, or it's not just one other class, it's an entire community event. We have students who present at a local library or a community center, and so they have an authentic audience around the topic that they were exploring. There's just so many different ways that you can do this. We also are associated. We've been supporting some student-led conferences around the world, some changemaker conferences. And one of the things they're doing as part of those are what they call doc-a-thons, which are short documentary film festivals, basically. And so that's another way that many students can see many other students' work, and another way that students can share what they did and how they did it and how it went and what they would do differently next time. So there's a lot of different ways to do this. There isn't just one way, and I think that's part of the success of the work, the model.
One thing I wonder about, gosh, I was at the UN, it might be 15 years ago, oh dear, when like simulcast teleconferences were still early days, but they had students in Pakistan and Queens, New York, and somewhere in Arabia, all talking to each other. These are pretty young, middle school, I'd say, about recycling and what are you doing in Dubai. And it struck me as such a exciting prospect. And now, of course, with Zoom, anyone can do this at any school. I'm wondering if, with Radhika here for another minute or two, is there much effort to connect students so they can really actualize that notion that plastic waste is an issue that's global, and you can talk to students working on some particular pathway in their community in Nairobi, for example. Maybe Katie again on that. Have you found? I mean, this can be even within Maine or with students in Idaho and the like. Is there a lot of crosstalk done, or can there be more?
Can you ask that again? Sorry, a lot of crosstalk about.
Can students? Is there much potential for students doing these projects in rural Maine, for example? Thinking about, there's a student in rural Idaho who's doing a project on pollinators. Can they connect?
That would be amazing. Julie, do you have?
Well, there's a lot happening internationally, actually, through the Global Schools program, which we're also connected to, and they run a number of climate projects, which different classrooms all over the world do and connect with other schools. And so there's that kind of connection that's been happening more and more. We don't yet have that kind of connection happening to the same extent, but we do have teachers who get to know one another through their cohorts, who then connect their classes and have their classes Zoom with each other, sometimes even visit each other, and collaborate together. So I think there's plenty of room for more, but I do see it starting to happen internationally, and I hope it happens more across the United States.
So with this ages of globalization, I think what is happening, what we do is that there is a online class and classes, and then once a month we have this live discussion where there is a UN at your doorstep is the program, where there is a UN leader and maybe a youth leader who comes in and talks about different issues, plastic, ocean cleanup. And we had like Salat Boyan from the South Asia Pacific come in and join the discussion. One day the students take over, and it is just fascinating to see the type of interaction, because some students are sitting in cafe, some people are sitting in their rooms, some are in classrooms, and they are all coming together to discuss how can what can they do to collaborate, resonate with each other. There is this kind of empathy and compassion, and there is also this kind of, yes, we can do something about it. So I think there is a lot in this space, as Julie is pointing out, to see what we can do. And I think thanks to Zoom, at least it is possible in some way. And how do we take this to another level of having a meaningful change with this interaction, and not let it be just one interaction that was amazing and then blew up? So how can we create those meaningful collaborations is where we want to go next.
That sounds great. Well, I'd be happy to do another session on here if we want to kind of dig in a little bit on, talk to someone at that Global Schools program, or find a way to facilitate teachers who are strapped for time and strapped for everything to have their students connect with other students working on problems, and to do it safely, obviously, which is another challenge in the interconnected world. This has been great so far. Radhika, thanks for coming on, and maybe we'll do another session on Ages of Globalization, get Jeffrey on here. Jeffrey Sachs has been on before at
Yes.
Columbia.
Thank you for making me a part of this discussion. Super fascinating.
Great
Best part of my day today.
Oh, good. I do love that when that can happen. So let's cap things out here. There's a couple more comments and questions. Sinclair Dickinson to Kate, specifically, love that you found a school that is encouraging you to continue bringing solutions-focused approaches into your studies. Good for that. Hold on. This question I think you addressed earlier. Dana Hain had said, I'd love to hear if there's an example of a whole class moving through the framework and taking collective action. Sorry if that's been mentioned.
No, I have lots of examples of that happening. The pollinator example is one that Katie already shared. There was a class in Hawaii who did a beach cleanup, analyzed the trash, found out that most of the trash was being generated by one particular industry or company, and went to the company to talk to them to say, we suggest that you clean this up because this is the result and this is what's happening. And if you don't clean it up, maybe we would have to make this more public. But if you do clean it up, then it would just get cleaned up and everybody would be happy. And so that was an example of where a group went through. They were concerned about trash on the beach, and that's where it ended up because that's how they investigated it and they analyzed it and they acted on it. There's a class in Maine. We're very concerned about the rural isolation of seniors. And so they learned all about rural isolation with the aging, and then they really delved into their community, and then they decided to hold a senior dance, which I thought was really an interesting way to handle that, and brought everyone together, and they had a great time. But there are many, many examples, and I really would be happy to talk with you further if you are interested in more examples.
That's great. Here, Leslie Maniotis, I hope I pronounced that right, says, I'm hearing all these connections to third space. And I have no idea what that is. You probably know. Wondering if you're all aware of that work.
Well, Leslie and I will be talking later in May, so that'll be great to explore some of the connections there. But this is one of the projects that are happening around the world that are really trying to create more places where young people can get together and can learn and act together. And there really is, there are a number of nonprofit organizations that are trying to provide spaces for that to happen. And we're trying to connect people where we can, and really trying to help people to be aware of all the different ways that we can create different types of spaces and different types of connections for people to work together towards common goals.
Katie, I mean, does any of this take any burden off of teachers? Or do you feel like it's still...
That's a really good question about burden.
It's if students get into gear and they're going, obviously you still have to facilitate it.
So one piece I can speak to, any educator knows the end of the year is a unique time in schools. And so it really has worked very well for me as a way to end the year because engagement is so high. I have, when we go into action mode, there's a whole week that revolves around the action in my classroom. And I have, students working on pollinator gardens. I have others making art pieces. And we have those who choose to do art. It goes on a gallery tour to local nursing homes. And so we have that education piece where they know they have an audience for it. I end up certain people who I go to every year who are available, knowing this project is happening, the action piece that week, they're available to help support students because there's only one of me in my classroom and I have 4 classes. And so I tend to combine time. So if a student works with a social worker, they just pivot their time to be during my class for one of those days so they can work with that student, especially if it's doing something outside of the building. But I think the biggest thing is just how high the engagement is of students and how, I don't know, the excitement in the room, the buzz, the way they feel about the projects. They are eager to get to class and do this work. And it's something that, I don't know, it's almost sad to let them go at the end of the year. I wish I could loop with them because we have this really cool experience. And my hope is it was huge for me to hear Kate talk about this, to see those students come back as seniors, because this is what we really aspire for as educators, that the work that we are doing resonates. So burden-wise, that is, if you look at that as a burden of the end of the year, it's definitely something that helps. I think one piece though that is a pivot is time, right? Time is the big challenge that educators have in terms of finding time to do the work. And I think what is in place now from the Institute for Humane Education is really helping with the tools that are available. The other piece I recommend strongly is if someone chooses to do this approach, have another educator be part of that with you. Just even though we do have coaches available, it's different when you're part of a team, when you have someone to talk with. When I originally went through the pilot training, her name is Sarah Tamman. She is on a different team. She's a social studies teacher. So she and I did that pilot training together, and then we pulled in our other half. So I pulled in Mr. Holmes, she pulled in Mrs. Pivaronis, and we worked together where the two of us had that foundational work to then connect it with other educators. I don't know what would have felt like if I didn't have Mrs. Tamman as really a teammate for me. Even though we didn't work with the same students, we collaborated so much and really modeled what this is about, which is coming together. So that's a piece I would definitely recommend is to do it with others if you can.
Can all of you go a few minutes after the turn of the hour? Because there's 2 or 3 quick little things I want to fit in. One is there's a really good, another question comment came in. John Epler says, I wrote and operated a project at Jefferson High School in Portland, Oregon called School Within a School back in 1970. Funded with federal urban development funds. It seems to have been almost an embryonic forerunner of the project under discussion. From listening to the presentation, I see what I missed in my attempt at student-led learning. It lacked the anchor of a problem-solving focus that action projects provide. Congratulations. Any quick thoughts? That's a pretty cool comment. And here's one more. Kim M. Says, I love online learning and connecting. I think many others do too. It's unfortunate that many institutions have turned away from online engagement. I really like the idea of using an online approach to creating global communities to fight climate change and biodiversity loss. I mean, there's so many ways that can work. You know, students can do supply chain projects where a student at the far end of the chain of a forest product can be talking to someone who's going to their furniture store in their town in Maine, or well, Maine has a lot of wood too. Go in the other direction. And there are a couple last things. One is when I was at Pace University, at the college level, one of my favorite professors, who was a colleague, we worked together on some things. He had an environmental clinic that was modeled on the law school. Pace has a great law school, and they have a great environmental law program. And the clinic that he created was for environmental policy, for students, undergrads at Pace, to work in a local community like Tarrytown along the Hudson to see if they can put solar panels over the parking lot at the train station. And what was so interesting about this, and they worked on lots of issues, they actually helped us change a law to keep circuses that enslave elephants essentially from coming into New York. There were other projects that they did successfully. But what was so interesting about it was there was a handoff process. So students one semester, you know, it demonstrated that the big grand problems of the world are not single semester problems. And the students at the end had to write a summary, an exit letter for the incoming students to pick up on the project going forward. It feels like another dimension that might be explored someday if a particular school or group of schools got onto an issue or opportunity. Having that handoff process feels like it's pretty interesting.
Yeah.
Any thoughts about that?
Well, there are teachers who do that on a regular basis with these projects who have because the last step is to assess and reflect and celebrate. And so just sort of to think about what do we do well? What would we recommend to somebody else who is starting to work on this project? How could we sustain this? How could we recommend that this gets sustained in our school? And that thinking about sustainability going forward, because in most schools they don't, like Kate was saying, I wish I looped with my students. Most schools don't do that. So you have to think about sustainability in a really different way. And I think some schools are starting to do that. Some schools are attaching certain projects to certain grade levels and then having students do work push the project forward, not just do the project, but think about what they could do next or what needs next to be done. In our work with Italian high schools, the sustainability question is built into the project. So the students have to think about how, when they take action, part of that action is going to be around the sustainability of the action and momentum that's going on. So I think that's starting to be built into individual projects, and certainly something that we encourage and love to see.
Great. So as I said, there's one more thing, and then I'd like just a closing manifesto, ideally from Kate too, the student getting into the broader dimensions of the world. It's about books. Katie, so, how do you do this? How do you write books and do all that we're talking about?
Yeah. I think the biggest comparison is my husband is a runner. So for him, running is his release. He trained it at his first marathon last year, and I can tell when he needs to go on a run, right? Like he's got it in how he comes back and how he feels. Writing is that way for me. Writing is extremely therapeutic. It's reflective. I slow down. It is the one time where for me time doesn't exist. I will look up and an hour and a half will pass and I don't know where it went. And that is a beautiful feeling, which writers know. It's powerful. And so for me, I actually started writing when I had children. It became my creative outlet. So laptop, what's great about it is you can close it, put it away. I used to do a lot of other creative forms that were much messier and harder. And I find time. After my kids go to bed, I am someone who stays up late and gets up early.
Wow.
It's just part of who I am, the way I'm wired. The Earth Will Survive with the asterisks, but we may not, was actually my COVID passion project of working on this. And that one was huge for me. I felt all of this in me that I wanted to do something, and environmental science is my background. And it's really my action project is this book, because it's really empowering for students of what they can do. And it's embedded with nonfiction information throughout it. But that was for me the ultimate project. I ended up donating all author royalties from the book to One Tree Planted. And I actually used it as an example. I did not want to make money off of that book. It just didn't feel right. It was for me an opportunity to educate and try to inspire the next generation.
Well, bravo on all of that. It's brava, actually, in the sense that I wish I had that same relationship with writing. Music is for me the thing that does what you were just talking about. And we all have that thing. So thank you so much, Katie Coppins, Kate Holdridge, Julie Meltzer, for being here today. Kate Holdridge, just a last reflection. What in the world what would success look like from your standpoint in terms of what you've learned through this process? And how do you envision the next 10 or 20 years in terms of how that might play out?
That's a really good question. I think that for me, success isn't necessarily defined by a singular endpoint. Like I don't go into any issue that I want to tackle, any problem that I want to solve as there being a singular solution. This solutionary unit and project has really emphasized the importance of looking at all of these issues from a very multidimensional approach and just thinking about what is the next step that I can take? What is the next way forward that I can go and do the most good with the least amount of harm? Of course, there are definitely problems that I'd like to solve, but it can be really hard getting lost in the weeds when you're trying to get to that endpoint without kind of realizing the different steps that you have to take along that journey. And so for me, success is really just embracing that journey and thinking about all the different ways that I can go about and make the change that I want to see in the world.
That's just great. Thank you again. Thanks to all of you for being on Sustain What today. And we definitely have some homework to do. We can do more. I'm happy to have this platform utilized, exploited to do more on any of these threads that have emerged in the last hour. This is Andy Revkin. This is Sustain What. It's my journey using constructive questions to tease apart tough problems. Like sustainability is a meaningless word unless you say sustain what, for whom, how, and then you're on a journey. And this solutionary work feels like it's a similar model. And I think the more we can figure out ways to spread this model, this network, this framework, the better. So this can be shared with anyone right after we're done on all these different links where it's streaming, and it'll be on revkin.substack.com as well. And thank you again for being part of it today, everybody. Oh, and to Radhika too, who came and went. So hold on one second. Hold on one second. And,